Hello and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to day 4 of my trip I did to North Korea back in 2008. You can watch videos from other days on my tour in the North Korea playlist. I thought it was about time that I put them up on here, and what you'll see was not recorded by myself, but by a cameraman we had, who I nicknamed Mr Spielberg, who went with us wherever we went on the tour. As well as his video, I'll also show you some photos I took whilst explaining the sites we visited during the day. Okay, so the previous evening we'd arrived in the southern city of Kaesong, which lies near the border with South Korea, which we would visit on this day. So we left our overnight stop and headed on our tour bus to our first stop of the day, which lay to the west of the city. I'll let the lady narrator on the video explain some more.
This is King Kongmin's mausoleum. It is a tomb of the 31st king of the Koryo dynasty and his wife. When the queen died in 1365, King Kongmin designed 2 tombs and supervised their construction for 7 years. In the right tomb, he buried the queen and kept the left one empty till he himself was buried after death in 1374. In each tomb, there is a passage and burial chamber. On the walls and ceilings, there are drawn the sun, 7 stars of the Big Dipper and Orion's belt. 4 guardian gods of the earth are drawn on each wall of the tomb, 12 in all. King Kongmin's mausoleum is preserved in its original state as a precious historic remain of our people.
So I'll show you a few photos of our first stop. The tomb complex is one of around 16 royal tombs of the Koryo dynasty that are scattered around a 20-kilometer radius of Kaesong. The dynasty unified and ruled the whole Korean peninsula between 918 AD and 1392, and the name Korea is derived from it. The tombs consist of a carved granite base, topped with a small hill, and are guarded by 12 guardian gods, sheep and tigers, representing the nations of Korea and Mongolia, as well as a stone offertory table that features a 7-ton stone slab in front of each tomb. The spirit road up to the tombs is lined with statues of military officers and Confucian officials. Their placement was an important consideration for the king, and many astrologers and mathematicians were consulted to make sure the site had good feng shui. Unfortunately, the tomb's relics were lost in 1905 when the tomb chamber was blasted open with dynamite and looted by the Japanese. Most of the relics inside are believed to have been taken back to Japan, though Kongmin's coffin is exhibited in the Koryo Museum in Kaesong, which we unfortunately never visited. After walking around the tombs, and as we started to come back down to the bus, a group of school children were gathered in neat, orderly rows at the bottom, along with a few teachers. They looked at us and smiled, but had obviously been told not to do anything else towards us. I smiled at them and waved as if to say that they needn't be afraid of us. They started to climb up towards the tombs as we boarded back on our bus and headed back into Kaesong. Along the way, we crossed over some railway lines, just as a locomotive was coming towards us. On the way to the tomb, I took this photo of 2 locals sitting on the railway line, which I really like. We then passed Nandaemun, the south gate, which was propped up with bamboo scaffolding poles, as we went round a roundabout on our way to the reunification highway. The old gate was originally built in 1391, when the inner fort of the old walled city was built, and is the only one of the original 7 gates to survive, although the wooden pavilion on top is a 1954 reconstruction, as the original was destroyed in 1950 by American bombing during the Korean War. The gate holds a bell that was used to call out the hours in order for the locals to be able to tell the time. We then got back on the Reunification Highway, which runs between the capital Pyongyang and the border with South Korea, and headed the short distance south to Panmunjom and the DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone. Panmunjom is the general name for the area where buildings are located on both sides of the 38th parallel, which splits the Korean peninsula into two following the Korean War. In fact, Panmunjom was actually a small village on the northern side of the border, but nothing of it remains today, except for a few buildings where the Korean War ceasefire armistice agreement was signed on the 27th of July 1953. All of a sudden, the highway just seemed to end abruptly, and we entered into a small compound through a narrow entrance that had anti-tank measures in the form of large concrete blocks either side, plus another over the road itself. There was a slogan upon it that I later found out read, "Reunification without outside interference." A couple of murals were also located in the compound, one of which displayed a boy and a girl, one was from the north and the other from the south, with their faces pressed up together over a picture of a united Korean nation. The slogan on it reads, "Let us pass on the united country to the next generation." Another had a united Korean peninsula with a hand and one finger pointed upwards that was indicating something along the lines of, "People, this is the way to a reunified homeland." Most poignantly though, there was also a sign that simply said, "Seoul, 70 kilometers." We were led into a building that turned out to be the DMZ Visitors Center. We were then introduced to our DMZ guide, who turned out to be a lieutenant colonel in the KPA, the Korean People's Army. He described, through our guide Shay's translations, each area of the model, and then pointed to various places on the map that was hung up high on a wall. Next door to the Visitors Center was a souvenir shop, snack bar, and some seating. After explaining the DMZ to us, the Lieutenant Colonel was now sat in one of the armchairs, smoking a cigarette whilst having his photo taken with some South Korean tourists. They even had their arms around his shoulders, a pretty amazing scene to witness given who he was and where they were. The bus drove us a short distance to the Armistice Talks Hall and Peace Museum. I'll let the lady narrator again explain some more. Of course, she tells it from the North Koreans' view of how things were done here.
In this room, ceasefire talk took place between the Korean People's Army and the US imperialists during the Korean War. The conference room is 1 kilometer south from the northern border of the demilitarized zone. Now in the room, there are preserved the table and chairs used by the senior and other delegates of the Korean and US sides as they were. The armistice talk took place between July 10, 1951 and July 19, 1953. This is the building for signing the armistice agreement. When the armistice talk reached an agreement on ceasefire and its machinery, the US side proposed holding a ceremony of signing the armistice agreement quietly in a temporary tent out of door. It was because the US imperialists were afraid that future generations might see the place where they signed a surrender document after suffering shameful defeat in the Korean War. In defiance of the sinister intention of the US imperialists, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea saw to it that the building, with an area of over 200 square meters, was set up in 5 days. And so, a ceremony of signing the armistice agreement was held here. As a result, this building remains as a witness of history. In the building, there are preserved the table of signing the armistice agreement, chairs, flags, documents, and other materials. This is monumental stone inscribed with an autograph of respected President Kim Il-sung. It was erected to immortalize the historic date of July 7, 1994, the last day of his life, when he put his signature on the last document on national reunification and died at his post. This is Conference Room District. In front of Common Pavilion, a building of the DPRK, there stand 7 buildings, which were used as conference rooms of the Military Armistice Commission and the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission in the past. In the center of the building, there stands a table crosswise, and on the table there are lying microphones along its middle line. Just it is the military demarcation line, a symbol of Korea's division. Between the buildings, a 40 centimeter wide and 7 centimeter high concrete marker is laid in a line with microphones in the building, thereby forming the demarcation line. The military demarcation line is 246 kilometers long in total.
So Panmunjom was one of the highlights during my tour to North Korea. Whilst we were in the blue UN conference building, we were allowed to take photos through the windows of the North Korean guards stood outside. For some reason, there didn't appear to be any South Korean guards, but then I saw an American soldier wander into view. All of a sudden, some South Korean guards turned up outside and stood at the corners of the buildings, looking straight down the sides. They wore some cool-looking sunglasses, which highlighted even more the differences between the two sides. They also had their fists clenched slightly away from their sides. That is said to be a taekwondo stance, which acts as a sign of intimidation over the North Korea guards. However, the North Korean guards simply ignored them. After visiting the conference room, we headed back up the steps and into the rear of the Panmun Pavilion, where we climbed up some more stairs and onto a balcony that overlooked the whole JSA, the Joint Security Area. We were on our own and could do pretty much anything we wanted, and so had our photos taken with the JSA as a backdrop. It was quite a surreal moment as we joked and larked about, whilst overlooking one of the world's most sensitive and dangerous military standoffs. Suddenly a tour party on the South Korean side came out of their building and walked in an orderly line into the conference building. What the South Korean tour party and military personnel must have thought of us, I still wonder to this day. The funny thing is, I came back to Panmunjom a week later as part of a tour from the south. Things were quite different on this tour than the one given on the north side, to say the least. Firstly, I had to sign a disclaimer to say that both South Korean and UN forces weren't responsible for any actions that may arise inside the DMZ, and there have been plenty over the years. Secondly, we were told to deposit our bags and to just take our cameras with us, but we weren't allowed to take any photos until we got inside the blue conference building. We also couldn't talk, point, or make any sudden gestures. We were also strangely told that we weren't allowed to sit down at any of the chairs around the table inside, which we were allowed to do from the north side. I was trying to hold my tongue by not saying that A, I was only here a week ago to the day, visiting on a North Korean tour, and B, we were allowed to sit down at the table, walk how we wanted, point, make gestures, talk, and basically do anything we wanted to do. We headed back down the stairs to our bus and said our goodbyes to the Lieutenant Colonel in the parking lot before boarding. A bus driver took us back up the reunification highway and into Kaesong in order for us to have lunch. We parked up at a restaurant called Tonggil that was opposite where we had stayed overnight. It was another traditional Korean meal where we sat on the floor at a very low table. On it were 13 small brass dishes, each of which contained different types of food, such as kimchi, rice, pickles and vegetables. The meal was called a pangsangi, which was usually only eaten by the royalty of Korea that used to be based in the city. After lunch, we hung around outside the restaurant on the street, beside some old houses that I would have loved to have walked around, but there were a couple of guys in dark suits lurking about, keeping an eye on us all. You can actually see one of them in this photo. We boarded back on the bus and headed up a hill called Mount Chanan in order to visit a pavilion called the Queen Noguk Pavilion that was built in 1780 for an archery contest. We also admired the views over the old city. The city's historical district survived being bombed during the Korean War because of its importance to the country. When Korea was partitioned at the 38th parallel following World War II, Kaesong was actually on the southern side of the line within the Republic of Korea, or today South Korea. However, during the Korean War, the city was captured by North Korea, and the 1953 Armistice Agreement left the city under their control. The bus then took us up another hill in order to see a Kim Il-sung statue. I think virtually every town in North Korea has its own, but this one was smaller than the one we'd visited in Pyongyang on the first full day of our tour. Now there's 2 statues here, as there's also one of Kim Jong-il, who was still alive when we were there. The statue looked down on Tonggil Street, meaning reunification, which is probably one of the most famous street scenes in North Korea, and one that I remember seeing on the net before I booked the tour. The 4-lane street runs from the statue downhill, past some tall high-rise buildings, and then uphill again where it meets up with the reunification highway. It was completely devoid of traffic, like it had been when we first arrived in the city the night before. Instead of traffic, a few people were walking across and cycling their bikes, plus I could see a traffic policeman. They didn't seem to have the attractive traffic ladies that we'd seen in Pyongyang here. He was just standing there in the middle of the road without any traffic to direct. A large party of people suddenly appeared on the right-hand side of the street, who it turned out was South Korean tourists visiting for the day and who had just eaten at the Kaesong restaurant number 1. Back on the bus again, we headed back towards Pyongyang on a reunification highway. The road was again devoid of any vehicles. We stopped just outside the capital to admire an archway over the road called the 3 Charters for National Reunification Monument. It was erected in 2001 and depicts 2 women in traditional Korean costumes, symbolizing the North and the South, holding a map of a reunified Korea. When editing this video, I've read that the monument has since been demolished back in January 2024 on the orders of Kim Jong-un, after he called it an eyesore and, according to official media, ordered the constitution be amended to say that the South was a primary foe, an invariable principal enemy. Our next stop was to this middle school, where we were treated to a performance of children singing, dancing and playing instruments. At the end, we actually got up and danced with them. We then headed to Pyongyang Circus, which cost an additional €20, as it wasn't included on our tour itinerary. But what I'll do, as our cameraman, Mr Spielberg, took a lot of footage from here, I'll put this up as a separate video which you can watch by clicking on the link at the top of your screen now. And that was day 4 of my tour to North Korea. Hope you all enjoyed it, and do please give me a like, and why not comment down below, and also why not subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any more videos from North Korea. For now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.